Hello and welcome to another Q&A. I'm Dr. Jared Jones. For those of you who don't know me and stumble on this later, I'm a PhD in Buddhist philosophy, and my research covers a number of different areas: Buddhist philosophy, philosophy of science, ancient systems of meditation, and the cognitive science of meditation as a philosopher and student of religion. I've also been a Buddhist for about 21 years, and overlapping with that, training in Dragon Gate Taoism and Chinese internal arts for another 6+ years, depending on where we start the clock, maybe a decade. In any case, I have launched this YouTube channel, or relaunched it, to try to teach lay people living in the real world about training in meditation in particular, and also to address common issues that people have in terms of Buddhist philosophy, not being able to understand various Buddhist concepts. And so these live Q&As are the big way that I'm addressing the common questions, common difficulties that people have in thinking about Buddhist philosophy and doing Buddhist practice. So if you have questions about Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist practice, as a Buddhist or a non-Buddhist, please do just pop your questions into the comment section if we're live, or the comment section below the video if this is a historic video. Right. So getting us started, I'd just like to say this experiment of trying to do this full time has now been going on for about 90 days, and so far, so good. Some of you know we put up a video showing off the new studio, and the new studio is working quite nicely. I'm really liking the quality of the sound is getting there. I'm still working with a sound engineer to get it to be really crisp, but it's doing okay. And hey, Dave, welcome. Yeah, I decided to do this one a little bit earlier because my wife and I have a little bit of a ritual on Thursdays where we hang out and have Five Guys, and I wanted to get the timing right so that I can have a nice marriage and do this at the same time. Otherwise, I might die mysteriously in my sleep. So, wow, here we go. Questions coming in. Right. So the format of this is relatively simple, right? Format of these sessions are relatively simple. What I like to do is this. If you have a question that you'd like to go to the top of the chat, because these sessions generally go on for about 2 hours, 3 hours, sometimes longer, depending upon how many questions there are. If you'd like your question to go to the top of the chat, then send a donation through, and then just let me know what part of the system you sent the donation through. I'll double check, and I'm happy to put donators' questions first. The reason being relatively simple. I do all of this based upon donations, so if I'm going to be able to continue, then a certain amount of donations have to come in for the work to go on. So the community who gets to enjoy all of this for free is benefiting from those people who are contributing each week, each month, as the case may be. Yes. So in addition to this, there are other ways that you can contribute. If you'd like to chip in, you could join one of the courses that I have running. I'm running 2 courses at the moment. The material in those courses that is mine is all available for free on YouTube, but I have it organized really nicely in the actual course, and there's a whole community there that are doing those practices aimed at making meditation more accessible to people living in the real world. In addition to this, I'm working with Neil Ripsky to do 18 Lohan Palm, which is a Chinese internal arts system coming through Shaolin, and a wonderful Chinese medical doctor, TCM doctor by the name of Dr. Chen Qiming. Very, very incredible person, very well regarded both in the West and in his home country in China. So that lineage, really, really excellent if you want something that's sort of sort of like yoga, but has hundreds of other layers to it that make the body and energy system and everything else all head in the same direction in terms of your training as a Buddhist or as a person on the path aspiring to be a great meditator. So those are wonderful ways that you could jump in and contribute, and at the same time, learn something quite valuable. Okay, so just taking a look. Let me see. Right, good. So first question in the chat, Varun Singh. If everything comes out of emptiness, including sentient beings, how is it not possible to again get trapped in samsara even after nirvana, as everything came from it and it is everything? Okay, so this is a common misconception. Let me have a drink of tea while I consider what I want to say. Right. So, what does emptiness mean, Varun? Let me just turn that on back on you for a second, and without using Gemini or ChatGPT or Grok, tell me what emptiness means, and then we'll take it from there. Because this is an extremely important question, but the answer isn't very interesting unless you have some conception of what it is we're talking about, right? So you give me your best understanding of emptiness, and then we will take it based upon your current understanding. And for those of you that are sort of along for the ride, whatever's on your mind in terms of your meditation practice, Buddhist studies, Buddhist practice, please do pop it into the chat. And as the chat is rolling by, I'll be happy to answer your questions if and when. More like when. Generally, I keep these sessions running until there are no more questions. Okay, good, good. All right. So since that's where you're at in terms of your current understanding, for those of you who are watching and just sort of listening rather than reading, he says, I take it as it is out of a concept of something that can't be understood, right? So this is a pretty common thing, I think, because of some Western interpretations, in particular of Venerable Nagarjuna's work, where he says that basically the view is that you have no view. And when you look at the tetralemma, when you look at the argument against the types of existence that Buddhism says are problematic, it seems to eliminate every possible viewpoint. He says, for example, to break it down and make it as easy as I can, that you have, how to say, doing it in terms of causality. So this is amongst the first slokas in his Mulabdhyamaka Karaka. He says this, if you were to, how to say, if you were to try to explain causality, and each of these correlate to schools that would have existed at Nagarjuna's time, some of them Buddhist, some of them non-Buddhist, you have four main options, right? The first option is you can say, well, a cause contains the actual full-blown effect inside. Welcome, Chloe. Yep, we are live. The cause contains the actual full-blown effect inside. And as such, it is the effect itself that brings about itself. Now, this sounds a bit strange, but there are various philosophies that were existing in India at the time, and some of which still exist, I believe, that make this argument. That the thing that makes it, for example, a tree, is already in the seed. So being a tree is somehow in the seed, and that treeness is what becomes a tree, not the seed, which is obviously not a tree, right? So that a thing comes from itself. In other words, things are eternal. This is one option. Another option is that things come from other things. And this is how most modern people think, right? Well, you take water that is existing as water, and you take sunlight, which is existing as sunlight, and you take the components of the seed, which are existing as the components of a seed. And you take the nutrients from the soil, which are existing as soil nutrients. And you somehow mix those together in nature's kitchen, and that stuff, all of that non-tree stuff becomes a tree. So the thing making it a tree is non-tree, right? So this is the opposite of the previous position. The first position was there's something in the seed that already is a tree. It exists as a tree, and that simply becomes a later instance of a tree. So it's self-causation. The next option is other causation. There are a bunch of things that aren't a tree that come together and they become a tree. In other words, trees are just made up of non-trees. And actually, when you analyze, this is closer to the truth than some of the other positions, but it's still, if you analyze closely, it doesn't work. If you put a bunch of things together that aren't a tree, you don't get a tree. You get a bunch of things put together that aren't a tree, right? So Nagarjuna rejects this position. Next, you have this idea that, well, there's something in the seed that makes it a tree, and you also need these other things that aren't a tree in order for it to go from unmanifest to manifest. Now, this is, once again, maybe a bit closer to some modern ideas, but this is actually a philosophical idea, not a scientific one. You might think, well, there's sort of like a genetic potential there, and that arranges itself in a certain way, and that becomes a tree. So it's sort of like you have the potential inside that is the real potential to be a tree. You combine that with external circumstances, and it becomes a tree, right? Nagarjuna also rejects this position because a bit difficult to make the argument, but we'll get there. Next, the final position is, well, if it's not self and it's not other and it's not self and other together, the only other option is that it doesn't come from itself or from other. In other words, it comes from nothing. It's spontaneous, right? And there are Western philosophers who have actually made similar arguments because they go, actually, when you look at the so-called causes of a thing, you don't end up ever arriving at the thing when you analyze closely enough. You just end up with the stuff that was already there arranged in a new way, which isn't the thing. So welcome, everyone. I'm talking about Nagarjuna answering Varun Singh's question about samsara and nirvana. If you're just tuning in, I will get to you. Okay, so having rejected that things basically exist in and of themselves as what they are, having rejected that things come into existence because of other things and then exist as what they are on the basis of other things, having rejected that some combination of both, that there's some kind of self-identity in there that combines somehow with the identities of other things, and that makes it what it is. And having rejected that the tree, in this case, comes from nothing or comes from nowhere or spontaneously arises, haven't we eliminated every possibility? Is there something else that besides coming from itself, coming from something else, coming from both itself and something else, or coming from nothing? Is there another possibility? I think with those we have covered every category, because it's either something that it is itself, or it's something that isn't itself that's causing it, or it's nothing. There's not another element in the range of possibilities. And Nagarjuna says all of those are wrong. Now, how do we fix this? Because we're either, as Varun Singh said, we're either in a position where we're saying, well, everything comes out of this so-called emptiness thing that we can't talk about, and it's sort of like an ineffable concept, or what, right? What's our other option? Well, luckily, the great commentators for many years have broken this down for us and made it clear what exactly Nagarjuna is negating and what Nagarjuna is not negating in this argument. So if you, I was actually reading this morning. Give me 1 second. So if you read Nagarjuna's other work, the Yukti Shashitika, the 60 stanzas on the nature of emptiness, most often known as just the 60 stanzas, he says this very clearly: all the various objects of experience are like the moon reflected on water, neither really true nor really false. Those appreciating this do not lose the view. Now, this is really important, Because most people who read Nagarjuna and don't read his 60 stanzas and his other work, they think, well, Nagarjuna just negates everything and never gets back to saying that things are real. And that's not true. Nagarjuna does get back to saying things are real. He just says, look, they're not real in the way you think they are, which is why we end up negating all of the four possibilities you think, as a normal person, are the only possibilities. But those aren't the only possibilities. Hence why he says, things are neither really true nor really false. What does he mean? Okay. What he means is this. This is very difficult, so I apologize. There's no way to make this easy, so I'll do my best. But this is not ineffable. It doesn't just mean that we can't talk about it or that it's all sort of out there in space. And for those of you who are interested, this was the actual topic of my PhD. So I've spent many, many years, in addition to training with a pretty serious lineage that deals with Nagarjuna's teachings and all of his writings and all of the commentaries on it. As a practitioner, I also have a PhD where I focused on the arguments of Nagarjuna. So this is 100% my area. Having said that, Nagarjuna's argument, if I were going to boil it down and make it as simple as possible and try to make it as bite-sized as possible for a non-specialist, if you didn't want to study this for years to understand what he's saying, although you probably should, here's what he's saying. If you think there's a self inside the seed, let's call it a seed identity, that makes a seed what it is, and that seed is what causes a tree, and then when the tree comes into existence, it exists as what it is. It has a tree identity. Where and how exactly did something existing as a seed, with its own identity, existing as what it is, where and how exactly did that become something completely different that isn't a seed, existing as what it is with its own identity? How and where did that happen? Since this is how our perception tends to, and our conception also, our ideas, tend to regard the process of a seed becoming a tree, every single possibility we point to will be wrong, because that's not how the identities of trees and seeds exist. And therefore, the four possibilities that we will come up with as an ordinary being, that the seed or that the tree is somehow in the seed, or that the seed, which isn't a tree, plus conditions produce a tree, or that some combination of a tree, unmanifested tree, and the conditions produce a tree, or that nothing produces trees, they're spontaneous. All four of these are wrong because we see the nature of the existence of those things in the wrong way. Nagarjuna makes this argument in the Mula Madhyamaka Karaka, where he says, and coins the term, as far as I know, things are dependently designated. Dependently designated. What a tree is a bit difficult to describe, but we could describe it as a dependently originated thing, which means that when you look for it existing in the way that it appears, you find that it doesn't exist that way at all. How does it appear? Like we just described. You look for the tree existing as some kind of identity that is among the parts, or is the parts, or pervades the parts, and you can't find it. You look for a tree existing somewhere besides the parts of a tree, you can't find it. It doesn't exist outside, it doesn't exist inside, and you're left with nothing to grab onto whatsoever. Not because trees don't exist. As he said, it's not that they're false, but the way that you see them as true is wrong. So how does the tree exist, and where does it exist? I've said on previous streams, if you look at a mountain and I ask you, where does the mountain begin? I mean, really think of a mountain you've seen or been to, or a hill that you've seen or been to. Where does that hill or mountain begin? Where does it start? You don't know. And not just because you're not looking carefully. If you go back to that place and you look carefully, you'll still not be able to find a boundary. And shouldn't a thing that exists have something that makes it different from other things? Because things that exist have properties, right? And those properties aren't shared in common with other things. That's part of what makes them what they are. So, since this is part of what makes them what they are, the set of characteristics that's unique, blah, 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 blah. Welcome, Danza. Oh, another Jones. There we are. So, since that's what should be there, you tell me, when you look for the mountain, where exactly is it? Where does it begin? Where does it end? What parts are included? Are the rocks that have broken free included? Because inside the mountain, there are big cracks, so that there are huge chunks of rock, miles long in some cases, that aren't attached to the earth in the same way anymore because they're not chemically bound. They're just stuck because of gravity. Is that the mountain, or is that a big chunk of rock stuck on the side of the mountain? Do you see how absurd it gets? Our perception thinks there's something in there making this mountain what it is. And the closer you look and try to find it, you find you can't tell which parts are the thing and aren't the thing. You can't tell where it begins and ends. You don't know exactly what properties it has that makes it what it is. This thing that you're grabbing onto as being, oh, no, there's really a mountain in there somewhere. That feeling you have that if you could just sit down with this crazy doctor guy and over tea, you could explain to him exactly what this mountain is. That feeling is what's called grasping to inherent existence. You think there's something inhering within the thing, making it what it is. But there is no such thing. And therefore, since you see the mountain existing that way, if I ask you, how did the mountain get here? You'll have the 4 problems Nagarjuna identified. You'll say, well, the mountain caused itself. No, that's not possible. It can't cause itself before it exists. Unless you're saying the mountain existed forever, but the earth didn't exist forever, so where did this mountain come from if it existed forever? No, that doesn't work. Okay, well then it was caused by other things. Okay, if things exist in that way, you're still stuck with things existing forever in and of themselves. So how do things existing forever in and of themselves cause new things that exist in and of themselves as what they are? It can't work that way. And when you look for things existing in that way, you don't find them. Think about it in terms of a chariot or a car, right? The classic is a chariot. If you take a car apart, you don't find a car inside. You find parts. You don't find a car. You find parts. Car parts. So where exactly is the car amongst these things, all of which are not a car? Where's the car? Because the rearview mirror isn't a car. The engine isn't a car. The hood isn't a car. The body of the car isn't a car. The windshield isn't a car. The wheels are not a car. The exhaust isn't a car. The axle's not a car. Everything that's there isn't a car. So if you say that, not you in particular, but I'm talking about view number 2, right? That other things cause the thing. That other things bring the thing into existence. Well, if that's the case, shouldn't we find a car amongst the car? Some new thing that's come into existence in addition to the parts? And instead, all we find is the parts. If you don't think that's true, show me the car. If you can point to a car in a car, I will give you $2 million. And not like a toy car in the car, you clever buggers, right? The all you can point to with your bony finger, as one of my teachers used to say, all you can point to with your bony finger is things that aren't a car. The tire, the windshield, the steering wheel, the electrical wires, this. So by putting a whole bunch of things that aren't a car together, you don't get a car. Not by itself. So this is the thing. This is the thing. View number 1, that the car causes itself, is obviously not true. View number 2, that the car is caused by putting other things together that aren't a car, obviously not true also, although it takes a little bit more work. So then, clearly, the view that you need to put the car itself and a bunch of things that aren't a car together, that's view number 3 that Nagarjuna is refuting. Obviously, that also doesn't work because we refuted the first 2. And then the third one, that cars just come out into existence out of nowhere. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing comes from nowhere. So then you're stuck in this awkward position, right? Either Nagarjuna is lying when he says this, when he says all the various objects of experience are like the moon reflected on water, neither really true nor really false. Those appreciating this do not lose the view. Either he's lying about that, or there's a way to fix this problem we've just created. Because if everything that appears, including the car, right, is not really true, in what way is it not true? Well, you think it exists in and of itself. That's not true, obviously, based upon the analysis that we've just done. But it's also not false. Why? Because Nagarjuna is a Buddhist, and his argument is cars dependently originate. And in particular, the degree of dependent origination that we need to be looking at with Nagarjuna's work is, according to him, in the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, dependent designation. So what does it mean to dependently designate something? It's a bit complicated. I wish Buddhist truths were as simple as, something that you could explain to a child. Some of them are. Some versions of dependent origination are that causes come from effects, and that you can't have a effect that doesn't depend on a cause. That parts depend upon wholes, and you can't have a whole that exists without depending upon parts. Those you can explain to a child. If you get rid of all the parts of the cup also goes away. If you burn all the seeds in a fire, all of the things that could have come from the seeds also go away, right? No problem. Dependent designation is a bit more subtle because it also part and whole, cause and effect. These two are also dependent upon dependent designation. The cause doesn't bring about the effect without dependent designation. Parts don't bring about a whole without dependent designation. So what is dependent designation? Lock in, because this is something extremely difficult. Very, very difficult. And I don't know if it's possible to get this by just hearing. So do your very best. Just let it soak in. If you're interested in an answer to the question that was posed earlier. So how does the tree exist as a dependent designation? Well, there's another really useful term that came about in the scholarship, mutually existent. I really like this term because imputedly existent, designatedly existent, merely existent. What else? Conventionally existent. These sorts of terms tend to make you think the wrong thing. Imputedly existent, doesn't that sound like you sort of make it up in your head and that's why it's there? And that's not Nagarjuna's argument, that you impute or designate a concept or a word and the thing just exists. Because if it was like that, I could impute giraffe onto my cup and it would exist as a giraffe. I just did that, and as you can see, it's still a cup, right? So that's not what it means. Conventionally existent, likewise, sounds. Doesn't it sound like we're saying, well, we all get together and agree that this is a giraffe? Does that make it a giraffe? Or have we missed something critical? No, it's not a giraffe just because we all agree it's a giraffe. If we have a definition for a giraffe that is like a large animal from Africa and blah, 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 simply because a group of us got together and said, well, we are going to consider this to be a four-legged mammal from the African continent. It's not. It can't exist that way. It doesn't function that way. And even if we get 4,000 people together to say that the earth is flat or that this is a giraffe, it doesn't exist in that way. So, like this. Here's the thing. We have to have an explanation for the existence of a tree, for example, that doesn't include, how do I say? we have to have an explanation for the existence of the tree that doesn't exist, that doesn't depend simply on the subjective side and doesn't depend simply on the objective side. This is actually the teaching of Nagarjuna and the great commentators on all of this stuff. So how do we do this? How do we arrive at that position? It's actually is quite elegant. In order for something to exist as what it is, it depends in part on the objective aspect and in part on the subjective aspect. There's a relationship between the subject and the object that makes things what they are. They are mutually existent as a relationship. They are relational. This is a great way of translating into modern language this term dependently originated. So what is the cup or the tree or the mountain empty of? When we say emptiness, it's empty of being non-relationally a cup. It's empty of being non-relationally a mountain. It's empty of being non-relationally a car. When you look at something that exists, let's make it a little bit simpler and say it exists based upon parts and causes and a relationship between subject and object. When you look at something that exists that way, what isn't there is something that exists without depending upon parts and causes and relationships between subject and object. Isn't that clear? So it's empty of that. That is not inside anywhere because it exists in the opposite way, right? Is this making sense? Since the cup exists based upon, the cup is a good example, because the cup exists based upon parts, the atoms making it up, causes, all of the causes and conditions that came together, like an artisan, someone to make the design, blah, 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 and a relationship between subject and object, which includes, for example, the fact that this is a certain color depends upon the relationship between your eye organ, your mental processing for visual stimulation of your eye organ, and that's where colors come from. Colors aren't out there in the world. Even shapes aren't out there in the world in the way that we see them. And shapes are also relative to, according to physics, are not simply existing out there in the world as what they are. They depend upon a relationship between a reference frame and the thing itself, which is relative, not ultimately existent. So this object can be in multiple shapes simultaneously. The physical object can have multiple shapes simultaneously in objective reality, for lack of a better term, dependent upon the relationship with the reference frame in which it is being observed. So, and that's not even quantum weirdness. That's just special relativity. Very well established science. So there's a relationship between subject and object that is part of how this object exists. There's a relationship between causes and effects, which is part of how this exists. And there's a relationship between parts and whole, which is part of how this object exists. So when you look for this object, looking for something that doesn't depend upon causes, doesn't depend upon parts, doesn't depend upon subject and object, you don't find something like that. It is empty of that. Now, is it caused by itself? Well, since there's nothing in here existing as a cup that could cause itself, it doesn't exist that way. Since there's nothing in here existing as parts of a cup, those can't be what caused the cup. Since there's nothing in here existing as a cup or parts of a cup, there's nothing in here that as a self and others could cause the cup to exist as a cup. Since things don't come into existence from nothing, the cup didn't come into existence from nowhere and nothing. If you break the cup on the ground, it goes out of existence. The cup is not something that exists separate from its parts and causes. So, what is the special ingredient? The special ingredient is dependent designation. How does this work? It's, again, the term that's quite useful is mutually existent. You need an objective aspect, and you need a subjective aspect to explain why this is a cup. And I could discuss that at some length. But we've already gone quite a distance down the rabbit hole. What is out here that exists objectively? Something that is non-obstructive to being known and functioning as a cup. When the term and concept cup is applied to a mental representation of this object after your senses have been stimulated by this object. That's what exists. I'll say it again. What exists out here is something that isn't obstructed from being known and functioning as a cup when perceived by and mentally represented by a sentient being, who then applies the term and concept of a cup to that mental representation. How do you know? Because when I apply the mental representation and term cup to this object, or mug to this object, I can drink my tea out of it. Right? It functions as a mug. If it was a giraffe, to flip it on its head, and I applied the term mug to the giraffe, I wouldn't be able to drink my tea out of it. So, like this, what exists is a mutually exists. It exists as a relationship between subject and object, not as something that is inhering or existing within the object itself. If there was something existing within the object itself that made it what it is, to your point, J. Mary Silver, you couldn't use it as a pencil holder, because the thing itself would be established in and of itself as an object out of which you can drink tea, and that's how it functions, and it can't do anything else. Instead of that, what's here is simply not obstructed from being known and functioning as a cup. It's also not obstructed from functioning and being known as a pencil holder. It's not existing from its own side as one thing, stuck as what it is. At the same time, it's not infinitely flexible. You can't turn this into a literal, organic, living and breathing cat in my hand. You can't turn this object. I can turn it into a pen holder in my hand. I can turn it into a makeshift speaker for my phone, right? Has anybody ever done that, where you put your phone into into a cup and then your cup turns into a speaker? So since the object itself is simply not obstructed from being known and functioning as a number of different things, it has a certain range of flexibility. So this view of mutual existence actually explains the conventional and normal way in which things exist and function. So now finally, to go back to, if he's still here, to go back to Varun Singh's question. If everything comes out of emptiness, including sentient beings, how is it not possible to again get trapped in samsara, even after nirvana, as everything came from it and it is everything? What does emptiness mean? It means that this object exists as a relationship, a set of specific, mutual, functioning relationships between subject and object. That's also how samsara exists. That's also how nirvana exists. That's also how the path to Buddhahood exists. That's also how consciousness exists. So everything that exists as series of relationships, causes, parts. And because of this, nirvana exists, since it's a thing that's a real thing, it exists in that way. Since samsara is a thing that exists and really does exist, it exists in that way. It doesn't exist inherently. It doesn't exist in and of itself. If it did, you couldn't get rid of samsara. Nirvana doesn't exist in and of itself. If it did, then we would already be in nirvana. Like actually in nirvana, not like sort of theoretically in a Buddhisty weird way in nirvana, but actually in nirvana, right? So since they are empty of inherent existence, we can bring them about. The results of Buddhist practice, I mean. We can bring nirvana about, we can bring Buddhahood about. Since it doesn't inherently exist, we can walk the path and actually attain the result. Why? Because all of the elements of the path exist as mutually existent things. So the negative ones, like all the stuff having to do with samsara and the negative karma and all this stuff, I can get rid of it. And nirvana, which this is a slightly different aspect, but why is nirvana reliable? This is a slightly different subject, but it's related to what you're saying. Why is it that you can't get trapped again after you've attained liberation? Because nirvana is not a caused thing. Nirvana is a cessation, a stopping. So, according to the Buddha and even Greek philosophy, right, this is a fairly universal idea, and even the theologians who are like Aquinas and so forth accepted this kind of idea. Changing things, caused things, things with parts, those are, generally speaking, those are unreliable, right? In the sense that they are constantly changing entities that aren't exactly the same thing all the time. So because they're like this, samsara, great example. What is samsara? It is a whole process of circular causes and effects that comes about due to action, motivated by mental states that aren't in alignment with how things actually are. Where do those mental states and emotions come from that are out of alignment with how things actually are? Well, they come out of having a misperception of how things are, misknowing how things are. You don't know how they are, and therefore you have reactions to reality that aren't appropriate, and therefore you take actions in that reality that aren't appropriate. And then those actions, according to Buddhist metaphysics, they leave an imprint on your awareness, and your awareness ultimately is the thing that's carrying those imprints forward, generating entire new universes, basically, not just experientially, but actually generating entire new universes of experience, entire new physical universes in certain points in time. And those, all of those things are based upon a causal process. So if you interrupt that causal process by removing the ignorance, right? And this completely goes away. Well, now all of the rest, the negative emotions, the karma, the creative process, the karma meaning action, the imprints in your awareness that come from those actions, the influence of the incredible creative power of your consciousness to create entire universes created by those imprints, all of that dissolves because it was depending upon this misperception, the ignorance. And therefore, the resultant condition isn't a caused thing. It's the absence of a thing that was a series of causes. That's what nirvana is. You didn't create a state or enter a state by creating a bunch of conditions that are required for that state to carry on. You caused something else to stop. Through creating the right conditions, something else stopped. So one of the analogies used for this is that if you had a candle and the candle burns down and burns down and burns down and even burns the wick until there's absolutely nothing left. It burns all the wax, and there's that last moment where the flame goes out of existence. There's no wax left. There's like an oil lamp, not like a wax lamp, actually, like an oil lamp where the wick is going down. And then let's say at the end that it actually burns up the wick too, and there's nothing left over. How do you relight it? What is there to relight? You haven't created some new thing by burning the candle out completely. You have removed what was there, the oil, the wick, the heat, and the flame. Since that's been completely removed, there's nothing to light back up. It's gone. So this doesn't mean you go out of existence as a being, which there have been debates in Buddhism about this, but this doesn't mean you go out of existence as a being. What it means is that process, that particular process of creation, in which you're creating entire universes of suffering experience based upon misperceiving how things are, negative mental activity coming from this, and positive mental activity, but just mental activity not in line with reality. imprints coming, or actions coming from that, imprints coming from that, the creative process of consciousness to create entire universes, hijacked and creating new universes that aren't what you wanted, ultimately. And back around you go, again and again and again and again, in rebirth. That ceases to exist for you. Now, from a Mahayana perspective, this entire process has been liberated. A mind without ignorance can be motivated to do actions. A mind without ignorance, misperception, can be motivated to do actions, which then creates purified imprints or creative potential in that mind. That purified creative potential in that mind can then, using the creative force of mind that's already there, create entire universes of stuff. So when you read the Mahayana Sutras, you see, oh, well, there are countless Buddhas emanating countless worlds, and this and this and this and this. When you look at the night sky at night, your mind literally, even according to Western psychological models, okay, your mind is literally creating an entire universe of visual experience in a flick of a finger. Bang. And Buddhism says that that's not just limited to cognitive experience with your senses. Subtler aspects of your mind literally create physical existence. So, Buddhas who have already attained nirvana by breaking the 12 links, and it's completely broken like an oil lamp that's burned down completely, even burning up the last bit of the wick so that there's nothing left. They've broken this cycle, but they still have the creative force of mind and the ability to create potentials in a very deliberate, specific way that can create exactly what they want at exactly the time they want, at exactly the way that benefits other beings. So this is a Buddha. A Buddha has perfect happiness for themselves and can generate unbelievable benefit for other beings. And it's reliable because it's based upon a cessation rather than bringing something new into existence that you're trying and hoping will last forever, which is not possible. Okay. All right. We are 40 minutes in, so I'll do a little commercial for those who are here. I do all of these live streams, including the Q&As, totally free of charge. I also have meditation class running Monday, Wednesday, Friday for those who are interested. That is non-secular. Of course, I talk a bit about Buddhism there, but the meditation that I teach, you can do in any tradition. I have students who are Christian, Jewish, I think one Muslim student, Sikh, secular, you name it. The meditation I teach is from a universal approach. So if you'd like to do some meditation Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you can catch me on these on another live stream. And then I also create video content mainly related to explaining Buddhism and concepts from Buddhism. So if you'd like to support all of that, since I do it all based on the generosity of the community, please do chip in what you can. The moderator can pop into the chat. In particular, what would be great is PayPal or Venmo, because they have the least amount of fees. If that's not possible, you can use the GoFundMe. If all of those are not possible, then go ahead and just send a super chat through. And unfortunately, YouTube takes 30% of that. And if you're on an iPhone will take another 30%. But whatever you can chip in is very much appreciated, because without you guys, I can't do any of this. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your contributions and so forth, because without you, none of this would happen. For those of you who'd like to train a little bit more seriously, I have the 5 Foundations of Meditation course, where all my material is arranged in a much better way for training in meditation, even though everything I teach is also available for free. And people that want to train in meditation more seriously, through the 5 Foundations community, we're going to be sponsoring people to go into retreat eventually. Once there's about 100 people in that community, we can start sponsoring 2 or 3 people a month to do 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks of retreat, depending upon how much money is needed by each person. And that's the big idea with that community, that if you wanted to be able to do longer term retreat and it was going to cost, call it $1,000 to do a month of retreat, with 100 people, each of us can chip in $10, and then you can do your month of retreat, right? And then later, somebody else needs 10 of your dollars to go into retreat. No problem. Here's $10 or whatever they can chip in, right? So like this, I'm building a community of practitioners who want to support each other in doing more serious practice through that 5 Foundations course group. So please do jump in there if you'd like to be part of that effort. I'm really excited about it. I hope it goes well. I'll be talking more about how that sponsorship process would work in the coming days, but you can jump in there. And then the last bit before I go back to questions is Shifu Neil Ripsky's course. So Neil Ripsky is a 40-year veteran Chinese internal martial artist who has a background in Shaolin martial arts. And for those of you who don't know, there's a whole stream of arts, health arts, and cultivation arts that come through the Chinese systems that are there basically to support your practice of things like Chan Buddhism, or Taoists have very similar practices, or the upper levels of Shaolin practice. And there are literally hundreds of layers to these systems that are meant to change your body, your energy system. You may have heard of Qigong, you may have heard of Neigong. So these systems are designed to give you increasingly better access to everything making up your being. It has something that's basically like Indian yogas, but then it has hundreds of other elements that build upon those skills and those awareness that you gain just from having a body that's stronger and more limber. So if you wanted something to train your body and your energy system to be taking you further down the path, in addition to your sort of work with your mind, jump into the 18 Lohan Palm course. My material's also baked into that course. That's a great way to support what I'm doing here. Okay, jumping back into the chat. The idea of the cause containing the result is where Buddha nature is rooted. So Buddha nature means that because your consciousness doesn't inherently exist as what it already is, therefore it can become the consciousness of a Buddha. Since your consciousness doesn't inherently exist as what it is, which is a limited being's consciousness, just a limited human being's consciousness, since it doesn't inherently exist as that, since it only relationally exists as that, to put it in positive terms, if you change the relationships, it can come to exist as the mind of a Buddha. So your mind has a nature that can become a Buddha's mind. And there are aspects of your mind right now that will be exactly the same as they are right now when you've attained Buddhahood. Your mind right now is clear and knowing. It will be like that when you attain Buddhahood. The subtlest aspect of your mind already isn't diluted by ignorance. And it'll be undiluted in exactly the same way when you attain Buddhahood. But you'll be aware of it all the time instead of being in the condition we are now, which is hanging out on YouTube together, having a cup of tea. Okay. Chloe says, hello there. I'm currently suffering. I grew up Christian. I feel really traumatized by Christianity. I'm being told that I will go to hell if I don't believe in Christ. I love the Buddha. Okay. So, yeah, no problem. See, that's really, really interesting. Really, really interesting. You don't actually have to, hate Christ or Christianity or any of these things as a Buddhist or someone who loves the Buddha. Let me give me a moment to explain this, because this may freak a few people out who've been at the Buddhist thing for a while, but hang in there. The Buddha said, if you train in ethics, humility, and love, you can be reborn in a heavenly realm. And your rebirth in that heavenly realm will last so long period of time, unbelievably long period of time, that from the point of view of a human being, you might as well say forever. It's not actually forever, but we're talking about, from human perspective, billions of years. Billions. Unimaginable. You know, I can't remember the numbers, something like kalpas, long periods of time, multiple kalpas as a heavenly being. And then if you've accumulated a lot of virtue, when you pass away in that realm, sometimes you're reborn again in those realms. Especially if you've trained in love and loving kindness, you can be reborn again and again and again in the heavenly realms for hundreds of lifetimes. So think about this, billions upon billions, again and again, reborn over and over in the heavenly realms. So the idea, for example, that a Christian could, through the relationship with a particular deity, through a sense of humility in the face of that deity, through doing their best to try to maintain ethics, which I know has not been your experience with the tradition, but bear with me, through humility, through love and charity, right? Lots of Christians they do, not all of them, but lots of Christians have very warm hearts. They do charity. They really do want other people to be reborn in the upper realms, in the heavenly realms. They think there's only one. We say there's a whole bunch. They think it lasts forever. We say it just lasts so long. It lasts an unbelievably long period of time. Eventually it ends. But both of us agree, actually, Buddhists and Christians, it would be better than going down would be to go up. Christians don't have this option. We would say, you want to be born as a human being or something higher than a human being. Now, if you get too subtle, if your mind gets too blissful, too subtle in the upper realms, then you can't keep doing your training. But there are places in the upper realms you can keep doing your training. And has anybody read the suttas? Those of you who have read the suttas and the sutras, what does the Buddha call himself? He calls himself teacher of gods and human beings. It's interesting, isn't it? He calls himself a teacher of gods and human beings. The Buddhas and even some of the Buddha's students in the suttas and sutras, they appear in the heavenly realms. They go into meditation, they appear in the heavenly realms, and they talk to beings there, and they do stuff with them, and sometimes they give them teachings and so forth. So, the idea that the Christians are 100% wrong and got all this wrong, and they're all, because they have one wrong view about whatever, as Buddhists we should see that, yes, they're all going to lower realms. No, that's not true. Not based upon what the Buddha taught, no. If, as you have experienced, Chloe, in some cases, if they have a wrong view in regards to, for example, some streams of Christian thought give you the idea, the impression that no matter what you do, you're okay. No matter what you do, you're fine. Since you're Christian, you've already been saved. There's nothing else to do. You're on the road. You just need to hang in there, and it doesn't matter what else you do for the rest of your life. You're good. Maybe not. And in particular, if you're using that as an excuse to do a lot of really bad stuff, from a Buddhist standpoint, you're not headed anywhere good after this lifetime. Unless you get really lucky and trigger a really good karma at the end of your life, probably the outcome's not going to be good. On the other hand, there's no reason to think, for example, that there isn't a Christ. Buddhism has explanations for how a person could do miracle healings, how a person could walk on water, how a person could raise themselves from the dead. These are all acceptable miracles that they could dispel demons, right? I can give you all of the Christian miracles as a Buddhist and say, yes, those things could very well be true, but they don't prove anything to me as a Buddhist because we have the same things in Buddhism. In the Tibetan tradition, for example, they have a whole class of practitioners with a name. I'm forgetting the name, but if somebody wants to know, put it in the comments below the video later and I'll find it. I put it up in the community section. If you search through the community section, you'll see there's a post on Christian Heaven where I put up this thing. But anyways, so there's this whole class of practitioners who clinically die, and then come back from the dead, sometimes up to a week or two later. And then they give teachings based upon having been deceased and traveled around a bit and come back to the body. So this is not a common experience, but it has a name. It happens commonly enough that the Tibetans have a name for it, right? So I can give you the resurrection. I can give you the miracle healings. I can give you walking on water. I can give you basically all of the miracles of the Christian tradition, and still say, and even say, yeah, there's ways of thinking that a deity, for example, in the Buddhist canon, a whole bunch of times the deities come down to earth and they appear as various things, various deities that are there. Then they'll appear as a human being or this or that. So we already have a concept of a deity who's a celestial being appearing as a human being. So I could even give you that maybe there's a triune God, a God who is part, let's say, some kind of energy system, energy body system. The spirit is part a human being and part a fully divine being. We have a way of explaining this that's totally non-contradictory and not weird for Buddhists. I'll give you all that. I'll give you the Trinity. I'll give you the miracles. I'll give you the heavenly rebirth after this lifetime through relationship with a particular deity. As long as you have some ethics and generosity and humility, as long as you're trying to be a good Christian, I'll give it all away, all of it. But there's like 2% I have to disagree with you on, and that 2% makes all the difference. According to Buddhism, there's no creator deity. According to Buddhism, a deity doesn't have ultimate control over where you're reborn. Sometimes beings with more power than us as human beings can influence your rebirth process a little bit, but the primary determining factor is your karma, the actions you performed while you were living and breathing and deciding what to do. That's the primary determining factor. Powerful beings, other beings, can sometimes influence conditions and change the outcome a bit. But the primary determining factor is your own actions and the imprints from your own actions. So, there's no permanent heaven, there's no permanent hell. The deity is not the primary thing determining where you end up, although it can be a contributing factor. And then there's no ultimate creator deity. That even there's a really funny sutta in a way, it's sort of a funny sutta, where the Buddha goes to heavenly realm and he talks to the first deity who woke up in this universe as a deity. Brahma is the name of the deity in that sort of localized system, right? But Brahma says of himself, I'm all-knowing, I'm all-powerful, I'm the beginning, I'm the end, I'm this, I'm that. Basically the description of Christian God, right? And he has a body. So he's an embodied being that also has, an expansive consciousness, great clairvoyance, great power. When he decides, I want there to be other beings, it triggers the karma of beings from a previous universe that take rebirth in his heavenly realm. And so he thinks, I've created these beings. So all of this gives Brahma, this highest deity or first deity at least who's reborn in this universe, gives Brahma the impression that he's a creator God. And then that worldview enters the human realm at some point and becomes the view that there's a creator God, according to Buddhism. So this is how it comes about. By the way, this was like 400 years before Christianity got started. So the Buddha said this is how these views come about, that sometimes the first deity that wakes up in the universe is confused about what they were in the past. They don't remember being anything other than what they are. Their will is extremely powerful and triggers the karma of other beings, and it almost looks like they're bringing other beings into existence, even though they aren't. And because of this, they get the wrong impression about themselves. And then the Buddha goes to him on one occasion, one of these Brahmas, and says something like, do you remember what you were in a previous life? And the Brahma goes, no. And the Buddha says, well, before this, you were a deity named Great Overwhelming Light. And before that, you were a deity named such and such. And before that, blah, 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 blah. According to the Buddha, we've all been reborn as the universal first, most powerful deity of a universe on some occasion. And yet we're still here, once again, having a cup of tea on YouTube. So are there powerful deities? Yes. Are there deities with creative power far exceeding our own? Yes. Are there heavenly realms in which you can be reborn? Yes. Are there deities that can assist you potentially in the process of being reborn in the intermediate state? Yes. Do you want to go to those places, it would be better than going somewhere bad. On the other hand, how do I say? Not on the other hand. I say all this to say that if you have a Christian background, you don't have to throw all that away. It actually fits 98% into a Buddhist worldview. You can keep all of it and still say, but there's this 2% that doesn't work because there's no ultimate creator God, because there's no permanent heavens, etc., etc. There's more work to do. And the more work that remains to be done is attaining a state that's actually stable. Why is heavenly rebirth not permanent? Causes, conditions, parts. What did we say about that earlier? Causes, conditions, parts are changing. Changing things eventually come to an end. They change and become something else. So like this, heavenly rebirth based upon the imprints of previous karma and some other factors, right? Those rebirths are temporary. Once the result has sort of worn out, then the result breaks apart and ceases to exist, at least your aspect of it, and then you're reborn somewhere else. So like this, there's no such thing as a permanent rebirth in a heavenly realm or permanent rebirth as a deity. And so you need something permanent. How do you get something permanent? You cause something else to cease to exist. What do you need to cause to cease to exist? Ignorance. Avidya. If you can cause ignorance to cease to exist, then the negative mental behaviors that come from that will cease to exist, and the actions that come from those mental behaviors will cease to exist, and the imprints that come from those behaviors will cease to exist. And then the entire creative process that leads to the formation of new universes and new rebirths in that way will cease to exist. And since you have ceased something, caused something to stop, that's permanent and reliable. You haven't created some new thing. You've just stopped some part of the process that's going on now. And from a Buddhist perspective, if you want to visit Christian heaven, if that's where 100 generations of your family ended up because they were good Christians or whatever, some of them, you can go visit them once you're a great bodhisattva. You know, break this cycle, attain nirvana, carry on in non-abiding nirvana, and you can go wherever you'd like. Read the suttas. The suttas have all these descriptions of the Buddha's students, even when they have concentration, just jhana, just concentration, going and visiting heavenly realms. I mean, this is the incredible thing about all of this from my standpoint is, I mean, in a way, it's so wide open, you know? Of course, there's this hard edge to Buddhism too. There's a cutting edge to the knife of all of these thoughts where it's saying, well, no, actually, you are fundamentally wrong about this if you go the other way, and you've missed a huge opportunity if you go the other way. You know, if you end up in a heavenly realm, you might have missed a huge opportunity if that's all you did with this life. Better than doing nothing, but man, you could have done so much more. Anyways, on the other hand, you don't have to throw it away. It actually does fit into the worldview that the Buddha presented in large part. Okay, so Danza C. Jones, a fellow Jones in the room. Do you think this relates in any way to Dogen Mountains and Waters Sutra? Mountains and waters are now manifestation, etc. So hopefully you're still here, Danza. Oh, yes, looks like you are. So we were talking about emptiness when this topic came up. Do you think... So there's a famous quote, I believe it's a Dogen quote, that in the beginning, mountains are mountains. In the middle, mountains are not mountains. And in the end, mountains are mountains again. Right? Something like this. Somebody can look it up. I think it's Dogen. So in the beginning, mountains are mountains. In the beginning, you look at the mountain and there's just a mountain there. And it looks like it's 400 million years old. It looks like it has nothing to do with you and me. It looks like there's something about it making it what it is. It looks like there's something inside it or pervading it or amongst the parts or somehow the collection of parts completely independent of you and me makes it a mountain out there in the world, and you and me, we just happen to be here to see it, doesn't it? That's how it seems in the beginning before you start thinking about it. This is what Buddhism calls naive perception, naive ordinary perception, or unexamined perception. In the middle, some crazy guy on YouTube says, where does the mountain begin? Like a child, like your kids. Where does the mountain begin? Where does it end? Are the rocks the mountain, or are they rocks? If you imagine a mountain, and imagine, for those of you who have seen Mount St. Helens blowing up, right, where the whole side of the mountain sloughed off and slid down the mountain. Inside the mountain, there are cracks and plates of rock that have broken free and are laying against each other. Since they're not all connected, which ones are the mountain and which ones are just big chunks of rocks laying on top of each other? If they're just big chunks of rock laying on top of each other, is that a mountain, or is that just chunks of rock laying on top of each other? Is the water running through the rocks in between the layers, is that the mountain, or is that just water in the mountain? Exactly at how disconnected does a rock need to be before it's not the mountain anymore? When you look for the mountain, you can't find something out there existing in the world that is the mountain. You can't find it among the parts. There's not one part inside the mountain like Lord of the Rings. There's not like a heart of the mountain that is the real mountain. Great series, by the way, but even in a fantasy sense, if you were to take the heart of the mountain and you took it out of the mountain is still there. It's just missing its heart, right? So it seems like somehow there's something making the mountain what it is, but what is that exactly? There's not one part that makes it what it is. There's not something pervading all the parts that makes it what it is, because if there was, you would know where the mountain begins and ends really easily, right? You would look at the ground and you would go, here's the spot, here's the line right here. It starts here, it ends here. How do I know? Because there's something pervading all the parts. There's something sort of suffusing or soaked into all the parts, and those ones are mountain ones, and these rocks here, these are mountain rocks, and these ones aren't mountain rocks. How do you know? Because there's something soaked into the mountain rocks that makes them mountain rocks, and there's something not soaked into these like regular rocks that makes them not mountain rocks. Right? But there's nothing like that. And then, so it's not inside, it's not pervading, and it's also not the collection. How do you know? Because if it was the collection, you would be able to tell me which parts are the actual collection, wouldn't you? Also, if it was a particular collection of parts that made it a mountain, if it lost some of those parts, it wouldn't be that particular collection anymore, and it would stop being a mountain. You'd be looking at a big pile and you would go, oh, that's just a bunch of rocks now. That's not a mountain. We took a part away, and now we have one rock and a whole pile of rocks. If we put them back together, we'll have a mountain. No, nothing like that happens, right? So in the middle, you lose the mountain. You go, where did the mountain go? I was pretty sure there was a mountain there a second ago. Now I've looked inside the mountain. I've looked pervading the mountain. I've looked amongst the parts of a mountain, and I can't find this thing that's so obvious to me. Now it's gone. And then in the end, when you understand that mountains are something that exists as a mutually existent phenomenon, as a coming together of subject and object, when you understand this, now the mountain's there again. It doesn't exist the way you thought. But What is the mountain? A mountain is a coming together of something that isn't obstructed, the object, the all the parts and so forth, not obstructed from being known as and functioning as a mountain, and a subject who is knowing those things and labeling those parts and so forth as a mountain. I go out and I look at the mountain and I go, what I'm seeing isn't obstructed from being known or functioning as a mountain. And since it's not obstructed from being known and functioning as a mountain, that relationship between subject and object, that is a mountain. The concept isn't a mountain, right? It's a concept. The word mountain isn't a mountain, it's a word. The process of perception isn't a mountain, that's a process of perception. The colors and shapes aren't a mountain, those are colors and shapes. The parts aren't a mountain, there's nothing pervading the parts that are a mountain. There's nothing inside the mountain that is a mountain. But when the right set of causes and conditions come together on this side that aren't obstructed from being known and functioning as a mountain, and the right set of terms and definitions and concepts come together on the subjective side, and those two can work together in harmony in the right way, where this can actually function according to what's coming from this side, that relationship is a mountain. It's a relationally existent thing or a mutually existent thing. This is the meaning of dependent origination, according to the highest system of thought in regards to all of this, according to me, and according to the Tibetans, and according to a lot of the Indian schools of Buddhism. So a mountain reappears. So in the beginning, we had a mountain. Naively, we thought it was there, existing in and of itself. Then we looked for it and we couldn't find it. And then we brought it back by realizing that it exists as a relationship, but it doesn't exist like this. It never existed like this. It only exists as a relationship. It doesn't exist non-relationally. So this is how I would say it relates to things like what you might see in some Zen literature. Let's see. Bossy Truth, if you're still here, says that they're overthinking and eating. What to do can I explain? I can do my best. So, I mean, the first thing is if you have something, I don't know you personally, but unlike many other people in this space, I hope this doesn't alienate anyone. I'm not like an anti-Western medicine guy. There's a lot of people like that in this space. I think Western medicine is fantastic. And if you have a health issue, including, wanting to be a little bit healthier in terms of your diet and so forth, I think the best people to talk to are probably your Western doctors and dietitians and whatever. And psychotherapists and whoever else need to get involved for you to figure out, why am I behaving in this way, and how do I manage this better, and how do I get into better shape and better health. I think in terms of the general discussion of stuff, if you're concerned about your health and your diet and so forth, talk to the pros, and they're very good at this. How do we know? Because they've put together studies and they've recorded the results over and over and over and over again, and we can prove that they're good at it. If you look at all the influencers online, and even some of the doctor influencers online who are trying to sell you whatever, I won't name any names because I don't like doing that, but there's some pretty funny, weird stuff out there now. If you were to, if you wanted to add additional layers to that process, there are, once you have your general situation under control, let's say, because you've gotten the best advice you can on the Western side, also on the side of mind training and traditional health arts, there's also there's more, right? So in terms of training your mind, of course, if you can get your mind under better control and then you really set your mind to doing something different than you've done before, then it will. Much better chance it's going to if your mind is more under control. If your mind's totally out of control, in a sense, it doesn't matter how much advice you get. If your mind is going to do what your mind is going to do, then you're being dragged around by your mind instead of your mind being dragged around by you, to put it colloquially, right? So if you train in concentration, the first technique that I teach is called intensive breath meditation. And meditation comes in a lot of different flavors. Not very much talked about are the ones on this side of the spectrum. Most of the ones you hear about are on this side of the spectrum in terms of flavor. On this side of the spectrum, you have techniques that are sort of gentle, soft, gradual. All the way over here would be something like Zazen Shikantaza, where you sit and you do nothing, right? You sit and you do absolutely nothing and modify nothing. That's the furthest you can go to this side here, right? Besides sitting up straight and having good posture, once that's comfortable, you're doing absolutely nothing. On the farthest side on this spectrum is basically extremely high intensity, high force work with your mind and sometimes also your body. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff ranging in between. The first technique that I teach is something on this side because it's easier to do. If you don't have any skills yet, if your mind's out of control, it's much easier to generate great force to meet your distractions, to meet your mind that's out of control, and gain skill in being able to grab your mind and get it to do something you want it to do. That's very useful. Doesn't take years. It takes weeks to change your mind, to be more under your control. And it doesn't take hours a day. It takes, between 5 minutes and 20 minutes a day for a few weeks, because you're using a technique that is building up the skills and the power of your mind to do certain things really, really, really quickly, right? Because you're focusing on those with great intensity instead of slowly, gradually building up those skills by just sitting for long periods of time without modifying anything. You'll gain the same skills. It just takes a lot longer. And this is more aligned with the end stages of the path. So you can do it right from the beginning. You can do it like this, but it's quite difficult if you're stirring your mind up repeatedly in between. If you're a monk living in a cave or living in a monastery and you rarely stir your mind up in between, this is really effective, really powerful, really important. Maybe the most profound kind of practice there is. But if you're living in the real world, you need something where you can stir your mind up all day and then in 5 minutes change the quality of your mind. Bang, right? So this is the technique that I teach is called intensive breath meditation, is the name that I have for it. I wasn't given a name for it when I learned it. The gentleman that taught it to me, for those of you who are interested, was a recognized lineage holding practitioner of a Zen lineage and was recognized by Gelug Tibetan Buddhist authorities as a highly capable practitioner of Tibetan Tantra. So he was highly accomplished in two different streams of quite different streams, in fact, of Buddhist practice. And he taught me this seemingly sort of silly, in a sense, kind of 5-minute practice, right? Like, how could 5 minutes actually do anything? Well, if you really work out the muscle associated with the mental muscle associated with being able to grab your attention and put it in one place, and you really work out that muscle intensely, hard, with great force and great determination for a short period, high intensity, short duration, you build up that skill really quick. Once you have that skill, you can apply it to other stuff. You can grab your attention and make it do more of what you want it to do. Will that immediately change everything about you in every single way and make you overcome every single problem you have? No. but it's a first step in being able to eventually control all the activities of your mind. So yeah, if you wanted to add something like that on and then go through some of the other practices that I teach, I'd be happy to do that with you. You could jump into the 5 Foundations course if you want to do it a bit more full on, or you could just join Sit and See Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we could do it that way. It's kind of up to you. Okay. Weird Walk is talking a bit about Western philosophy. These ideas do have parallels, but no direct corollaries in Western thought. I have seen parallels, but no direct correlations. In particular, with the highest views, as I was just describing them, nothing exactly like that. There's some things that they have aspects of it, but not the full thing. All of these other views that I've seen, they grab onto something somewhere. They grab onto consciousness, or they grab onto some aspect of physical reality, or they grab onto the given, basically. They retreat to the given, as they say in Western philosophy, where something has to be taken as a ground from which you build everything else. And Buddhism says, no, there's nothing like that. Everything exists relationally in such a way that if you point to this, to establish this, you have to point to something else. And eventually you end up back where you started. It's all a tangled web. There's no final underlying thing that is the only thing. Okay. Danza says, I'm a Theravadan. Fantastic. Theravada's pretty awesome. Bhante Sujato would get a kick out of hearing this. I think that was in regards to the emptiness teachings. Yeah. I'm not as familiar with the way that they structure these teachings in modern Theravada. The Tibetan systems classify two views as being Pratimoksha-yana, let's call them Pratimoksha-yana, or individual liberation school views. But those aren't those schools, those philosophical schools, the Sautrantika and Vaibhashika, those aren't the views that modern Theravada adheres to in any of their formal writing. And in fact, I've heard one of my Gelug teachers say that if you probe the writings of modern Theravada and the way that it's being taught in Thai Forest, I believe, what you end up finding in their wisdom teachings is that they have like the full spectrum, or a fair more of the spectrum of what we would consider to be sort of Mahayana teachings on selflessness and emptiness, or they are also in the modern Theravada. So yeah, wouldn't surprise me. I'm not as familiar with those, but I'm sure these ideas would be very helpful in the Theravadan tradition. So Weird Walk says that the Platonists might say it relies on what would be called an ideal, which you never perceive. Okay, how do I know this is a cup? If I never perceive the thing that makes it what it is, how do I know this is a cup? When I look at it, how do I know what it is? And not only that, big trouble, because I know that it's sort of like an oblong, round sort of cylindrical thing that's orange in color and black in color. How do I know all that if I never perceive anything that is the thing making it what it is? If I only perceive stuff not making it what it is, and the thing making it what it is imperceptible, how do I know what it is? That can't work. And if the thing that is the actual thing has nothing to do with this cup, then this cup isn't that thing. It's something else. This is just stuff. The cup is actually something else completely unrelated to this thing. So the Platonistic idea doesn't work. Okay. How does Buddhism get to a dualist view? So Buddhism has a range of different philosophical positions. In terms of classical dualism, if you're talking about the subject and the object, I'm sorry, that subjects being a different substance than objects, basically, mental stuff being a different substance than physical stuff, that is a less subtle philosophical view than the one that I would take personally. If you read the Tantras say that consciousness always comes with subtle physical substances associated with it. And that, so that basically, in a manner of speaking, the smallest unit of reality is a package, a monism of mental event and subtle physical substance. So these two always come together. It's a monism of mind matter, not simply mind or matter. And so this then explains why it is that conscious stuff ends up producing material stuff. At our level of experience, the mental stuff, even in meditation, the mind seems totally different than material stuff. Until you do certain practices where you see that when you put a mind in certain places, then material stuff starts to pool in those places. Blood, chi, whatever. Energy, people say, I really hate that term, but that vital substance starts to pool wherever you put your mind. And we've done this experiment before, this one, where it doesn't take that long for you to actually be able to experience that you can put your mind somewhere, pool some substance there, and feel the substance that's been pooled there because you put your mind in that location. And that would simply be your own psychological whatever, potentially, if it weren't for the fact that other people can feel it when you do that too. Not just you. But if you do this and then you take that substance and put it on somebody, they'll go, whoa, what was that? Why is my arm tingling? Maybe not you guys, but if you've been doing those practices a while, this is part of how things, again, way more work you would need to do, but this is part of how things like Qigong, Neigong, Chinese traditional medical healing things work. You build up a huge amount of these substances that come along with consciousness, and then you can press them through your body and into other people's bodies and so forth. But it's not a casual endeavor. It takes a lot of work to build those things up. Representationalism. Buddhists are not representationalists in any fashion, in my way of thinking about it. Kendra. I can be a utilitarian object or a fashion object. It's clay someone formed into a cup and fired with a log. So the utility of a thing, the function of a thing, isn't part of the object. That's part of how we relate to the object. So the function of the thing can't be what makes it what it is, because the function of the thing comes from us. This is an object for drinking. Obviously, that comes from a being who drinks stuff, not from the thing. This is an object for holding pens, right? Obviously, that comes from a being who knows what a pen is, makes pens, and wants another object to hold pens. That's not something that comes from this object. So it's not, the utility of the object doesn't make the thing itself what it is. If you mean fashion the object in terms of, well, somebody made it into a cup, okay, no problem. Show me the cup. If somebody fashioned this into a cup, tell me what a cup is. Tell me where this cup begins and ends. And show me exactly where the cup is, because this is a bunch of atoms that aren't cups. And if you say, well, no, the parts have been arranged in a certain way that are a cup, now it's missing some of the parts. Is it still a cup? Yeah, it's still a cup. Oh, okay, well then it's not just the collection of parts, is it? It's not the collection of parts. It's not something pervading all the parts, because then if I went like this, I'd have some cups on my hand, and I'd have like 100 billion cups in my hand, because there's a bunch of parts here all pervaded by the quality that makes them a cup. And certainly it's not one thing making it a cup, because if it was, then I could get rid of everything else and I could get rid of all the atoms and have a cup, which I can't do. So nobody fashioned this into a cup except in a totally ordinary conventional sense. But there was no moment when these parts became a cup in and of itself. Just as there was no moment when a small hill being pushed up by tectonic plates became a mountain. When did it stop being a hill and start being a mountain? At exactly what micron of measurement? When it was like one atom taller or one atom smaller? Now it was a hill. Now, no, there is no, obviously this is stupid, right? There was no time where something became something else in and of itself. However, there is a relational time in which this became a cup, potentially. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a cup. Okay. Danza. Never heard someone explain Nagarjuna. Aquinas famously burned his work after he had a divine experience. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know he had burned some of his work or all of his work. Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of a thing. We have a bit of a fetish as Western people for, and I know not all of you are Western, but as Western people, we have a bit of a fetish for experience. We want to take hallucinogens so we can have an experience. We want to get drunk so we can have an experience. We want to travel so we can have an experience. We want to meditate so we can have an experience. The final realizations of the path in Buddhism are not experiences in that sense. They are being. You are something. And now you're aware that you're something. You're aware of how it always was. It's not that you've had you sat down and, oh, I saw the whole universe. I got my consciousness expanded out. I saw the whole universe. No, that's not anything of importance on the path. That's an experience. So there's all sorts of things that can be experienced, but that's not the path. The path is uncovering what you are and how things are. And part of uncovering what things are and how things are involves studying, learning things, using your conceptual mind. This goes all the way back to the time of the Buddha. People are like, oh, no, when you read the Pali and blah, 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 there's nothing there about... And especially the Zen people in the modern world, this is not a big problem when you go to China, which is where Zen comes from, by the way. But, I have on the top shelf, I did this on a previous live stream, I have on a top shelf, like, not even Dogen's complete works, just like some of them are a stack of books this tall. He could quote sutras from memory. In the old days, you had to memorize all of the textbooks for Buddhism. That's where sutras and suttas come from. People memorized all the textbooks, right? And then you would have to discuss them with senior people and understand, okay, now that I've memorized the textbook for the practice, what does this part mean? What's that part mean? And then you had to connect it to your actual training experiences, right? But we have this thing like, oh, it's either the study or it's the practice, or it's the experience. And if it's not the experience or the practice, then it's not a real thing. It's just words. Not at all. The great traditions actually say that analytical meditation, vipassana, is a conceptual process, right up until the time where you're meditating on the result of that conceptual process. So if you want to be able to do high-level vipassana practice, which is the highest level of Buddhist stuff, you have to have a strong conceptual understanding of whatever it is you're trying to do. The Buddha, you'll recall, did the highest samadhis of the highest gurus of the highest systems that he could find at the time, which are all non-conceptual, highly concentrated states of mind in extremely refined, subtle states of concentration. And he said, you know what? This doesn't fix the problem. And then he sits down beneath a tree and he just starts analyzing some stuff, thinking things through. And then he arrives at a new conclusion and rests his mind on that conclusion, and it explodes his ignorance. So, according to especially the stream coming through India and into Tibet, but this is a very old tradition going back at least to Dharmakirti, but arguably much earlier than this. There's this argument that analytic meditation, vipassana, involves conceptual thought. This is part of what marks it as being what it is. You're thinking it through. Now, you're not just thinking it through in a random way. You already need to have some concentration, and you bring your concentration practice and your conceptual thought together. Even with something like body scanning, right? Put your mind in your finger. How do you do that without conceptual thought? Because you need to know what a finger is. You need to have a definition for your finger. You need to mentally divide this part from this part, which is a conceptual process, and say, well, no, that's my knuckle. That's the end of the finger. This is the tip. And I'm going to put my awareness in this part, not this part over here, not the edge of the knuckle on this side, only this half of the knuckle, blah, blah, blah. That's conceptual. So your vipassana practice, even when you're combining concept and observation, put the mind in the finger. Now put the mind in the thumb. Now put the mind in the palm. Now put the mind in the wrist. Now put the mind here. Is combining conceptual thought and observation in a state of concentration. And then when you have completed an analysis of the body, for example, if you're trying to find the self in the body, and you go, is it in my left arm? Well, you have to have a concept of left arm. Here's where it begins and ends. When I feel into my body, I'm looking inside the left arm. You have to have a concept of self. What is the specific kind of self I'm looking for in the arm? Because it can't just be any kind of self. It has to be the specific one that is the problem, keeping you bound to samsara, not just some random idea of a self. So, with that idea of, in particular, the type of self that we mistakenly think exists in our own 5 aggregates, you then investigate the aggregates using that conceptual image of self, and you look in the arm. When I look for this self that is the problem in the arm, do I find it there? No, it's not there. What about this arm? Do I find it there? Nope. No, it's not there. Okay. So those are eliminated. What about my legs? Do I find it in my left leg? No. No, it's not there. What about the right? No, not there. Okay, in my trunk. Is it in my spleen? Or is it in my bladder? No. Sexual organs? No. Hips? No. Kidneys? Spine? Ribs? My liver? Stomach? My heart? My lungs? Large intestine? Small intestine? Spleen? Okay, no. No, it's not in any of the organs. It's not in the trunk or the body. What about my neck? No, not in the neck. Okay, all that's left is my skull. Is it inside this? Is it in the left side of the skull? Is it in the right side of the skull? Okay, it's not in there. There's nowhere else it could be. It's definitely not in the body. Okay, is it in consciousness? Well, consciousness is made up of such and such and such and such. Is it my memories? No, memories come and go. The self, even without memories there, if I lost all my memories, I would still have a sense of self, so it's not the memories. Okay. What about seeing? Well, I could go blind. What about hearing? Well, I could go deaf. What about smell? I could lose smell or taste or touch. So it's not in the 5 senses. Well, then it must be in the central mind. It must be. So you see what I mean? You have to have a huge amount of conceptual resource at your disposal to do the type of analysis that creates liberation according to Buddhism. I mean, that's a lot of information, right? To correctly identify what the type of self is you're trying to overcome, and then conceptually, with a combination of direct observation with meditative, like an actual meditative ability to look at each part that you're naming, put the mind in there, and look for the thing that you have identified as the problem, the type of self you have identified. So to do that is a very, very skilled state of mind. But it involves concept. not just holding the mind on something. It involves analysis using concepts and meditative observation. So, so this thing about, well, once I've done the Vipassana, I'm going to burn all the books or something is nuts, right? No, you have decades of going through this kinds of analysis again and again and again and again until your mind's natural ignorance starts to be uprooted. According to Buddhism, this is probably going to be a multiple lifetime endeavor for you. So burning the books would be nuts. Okay. All right. Okay. Weird Walk is asking about duality. Do you think the mind is doing the creating or doing a receiving of consciousness? It's a neutral monism, right? The subtlest unit of reality is a packet of very subtle physical substance and consciousness. This is the bridge between mental stuff and coarse material stuff. So if you, for example, were doing Qigong, I'll move back a little bit. Oh no, I have to stay close. So if you were doing Qigong, and let's say you were working on your liver, okay? So your liver is over here on the right-hand side, sort of slightly behind the ribs on the right-hand side, and slightly hanging down underneath the ribs on the right-hand side, okay? So your liver is there. Right now, as we're talking, for those of you who have some meditative experience, if you close your eyes and you place your attention, as much of your tactile awareness as you can, if you squeeze it into the area of the liver, so just behind the ribs on the right-hand side, if you squeeze your awareness into that area, you'll start to feel that the tissue there starts to respond to the fact that you've placed a huge amount of attention in there. And if you do that for a long enough period of time, it'll actually heat up. It'll warm up. So when the mind moves somewhere, it brings with it some of these subtler substances. This is what Qigong is. Qi is a substance that comes along with consciousness. It's a coarser type of substance that comes along with consciousness. Now, this is really interesting because from a traditional Chinese medical perspective and a Tibetan medical perspective, a Tibetan tantric perspective, etc., you can use the fact that these subtle minds are associated with subtle substances to make a lot of progress really quickly in training yourself, because it goes both ways. Since there's a neutral monism of consciousness and substance, if you change the substance, you change consciousness. If you change consciousness, you change the substance. And there are a couple different layers of substance associated with consciousness and different types of consciousness. So if you change the body and that changes the energy system, that will change your mind. If you change your mind, that'll change the energy system, which will change the body. If you change the energy system, it'll change the body and the mind. And so this is what's used, for those of you who are curious, this is what's used by great tantric yogis. This is what's used in Qigong in the Chinese systems, Neigong in the Shaolin and Taoist systems, internal alchemy it's called. The internal alchemy is working with these subtle substances and doing different things with them. And what does it do? It stabilizes your emotions, because your emotions need those substances. They have to ride those substances to arise, according to these systems, right? And having a bit of experience with these systems, I would say this is true. You know, if you look at the body maps of emotion is a global study at this point. You'll see that most cultures, actually all cultures I think they've looked at, when they feel emotion, they feel most of the emotion starts sort of in the heart area here, And it sort of comes out in a column like this, running up and down the body. So the main area you feel emotion is in a column in the center of the body. That's interesting. Sounds familiar. A column in the center of the body with really powerful center in different parts of your body associated with emotion, in the heart center, in the throat, in the head, in the stomach, running through the center. That's really interesting. Huh. Anyways, these things are something that you can become aware of through becoming aware of the tactile body, the sensations in your body. So when you train in something like 18 Lohan Palm, which again, to plug my own thing very briefly, I'm baking my meditation techniques into the 18 Lohan Palm curriculum. Somebody can pop that in the chat one more time. But part of the essence of those systems is building up a huge amount of tactile awareness until you can feel the cavities inside your body. You can feel the cavity of your chest. You can feel the cavity of the lower abdomen. You can feel the cavity inside your skull. You can feel where your bones are. You can feel where your organs are. Advanced practitioners can feel the marrow inside their bones. And then, of course, also, along with that tactile awareness, you can start to feel the actual substances associated with consciousness. And then you can do stuff with those substances. And that happens long before you can feel the marrow inside your bones. I know this sounds totally wacko to some of you, but, having trained a bit in these things and trained with people that are quite competent and trustworthy in a number of other areas, I'm convinced these are real things a human being can do. So when you work with these sorts of things, it gives you another set of tools to deal with the emotions and so forth. So it's a two-way street. Why is it that when your brain does stuff or you affect your brain, it affects consciousness? Because some of the winds or subtle substances associated with the mind are obviously doing stuff in your brain. It's also doing stuff in the center of your chest. It's doing stuff in your abdomen. So when your mind moves, when your brain, something happens to your brain, it affects how your consciousness operates as a human being. But also when you do stuff with your mind, it changes your brain. If you do stuff with your energy system, it'll change your brain. And this may sound a bit pseudoscientific, but there's a fair amount of research now on what's called Tumo, inner fire meditation, which is based exactly on this principle. You build up a huge amount of these substances in the lower part of your body. That eventually forces its way up the body into your head, and it causes all sorts of mental effects that are beneficial for your practice as a tantric yogi. Very similar, if not exactly the same system in Hindu Tantra, Jain Tantra, under the name Kundalini practice. Very similar, if not exactly the same practice called Neidan, internal alchemy, in the Taoist systems and the Chinese systems. Now, exactly the details of them and how they do them and the sort of the finer details of what they're doing with those things is different. But basically, from what I can see from my studies and practice and research, they all more or less agree. You have, roughly speaking, 3, maybe 4 layers to your being: the body, an energy system with substances in it, and consciousness, which has very subtle substances associated with it. And if you can work with those, all of them affect each other. So Buddhists at the sutra level and the sutta level mainly work with just consciousness, just your mind. If you work with your mind long enough, intensely enough, it will change the energy system and change the body. So you don't have to work with the body or the energy system. You can make it happen by working with your mind. But it's slow and difficult. Now, if you work with the body, eventually, body and the breath, eventually you can affect the energy system and the mind. If you work with the energy system, you'll affect the body and the mind. Now, if you work with all three, which is the idea with the Shaolin arts like 18 Lohan Palm, you work with all three at the same time and point them in the same direction. Now you're really rocking and rolling, right? Now all parts of you are headed the same way and contributing to the same process. Same thing in the tantric systems. You begin to point all parts of you in the same direction. Your body, your energy system, your mind. Now they're all working in tandem. Right. So this is something, of course, you won't find described at least explicitly in the sutra system, but there's lots of other really interesting stuff in the sutras that people don't talk about. Like on one occasion, the Buddha called down a deity and told a guy that he would have the deity split his head open if the guy didn't answer a question that he had asked him. And then there was another occasion where one of the Buddha's students, who was not a particularly intelligent person, gained realization, and then he was doing a tour of some nunneries giving teachings and would levitate in the air and expel fire and water from his body while he was levitating and giving teachings. And you go, you know what? This sounds a lot more like tantric stuff than the standard sutra curriculum. But I digress. Okay. Let's see. Nagarjuna gained wisdom from the Nagas, mythical race. Yeah, that is the traditional story, that Nagarjuna received teachings from the Nagas that were given to the Nagas by the Buddha himself. That is the traditional story. Okay, I need to go pretty rapidly now because I need to wrap up by 6 o'clock. What is the question that can't be understood by the mind? Is there such a question? Okay, yes. So here's the thing. The direct insight into emptiness itself is a bit like, I'm here having some chocolate, right? I'm sure most of you have had chocolate at some point in your life. If you talk to somebody, from the countryside of New Zealand in the jungle, or I don't know, certain remote communities in Alaska or something, who've never had a piece of chocolate, and you try your very best, well, it's sort of, come up with words for this, right? Chocolate is usually a word that we use to describe other things that are complex to people who have tasted chocolate, don't we? Oh, well, the wine it's kind of chocolatey and has a bit of this and that and leather and this and, whatever. When you read wine descriptions, I used to be a restaurant guy. I don't drink or anything, but, So chocolate, how do you describe this? Well, it's bitter and it's sweet and it's a little sour. Okay. Does that tell that person anything about the taste of this chocolate beyond like the most vague description you can think of? There's no way to describe it. Unless somebody has actually tasted it, they don't know what you're talking about, do they? So likewise, the actual direct insight into emptiness in terms of you've done the meditation, you've actually had a direct experience of emptiness, which is an advanced meditative experience. That can't be described in words in terms of the actual experience. However, the actual ontology of emptiness, as we were just talking about, what is emptiness, what are its features, what is it counteracting, et cetera, all of that can be described in great detail. The whole process for realizing emptiness, et cetera, can all be described in great detail. Okay. Kafir Uden Mulhideen. It's an interesting name. Do you do consultations for books? I'd be happy to talk to you about it. If you send me a message, maybe if the moderator's still here, you can put the Discord down below. Send me a message on there. Yeah, we can talk about it. At the moment, it depends on how we're defining things, but I'm not really doing anything that's paid. It's all sort of by donations or people that are willingly paying for something they could be getting for free from me. So we'd have to, I guess, talk about the financial side of it, I suppose. But yeah, we can talk about it if there's something that you're working on. Referential recurrence. You should go on Deconstruction Zone. Yeah, again, go to Discord or Facebook or whatever. Get me hooked up with them. I've never talked to those folks, but if it's up my alley and up their alley, I'm happy to talk to anyone about anything besides maybe the Satanists. Okay. Cromer. Great videos. Do you think the Buddha's analogy for the length of an eon is meant to be interpreted literally? I don't know. I tend to, over the years, I started thinking about a lot of things as analogies, and then over the years ended up one by one coming to the conclusion that things I thought were analogies were literal descriptions of real things that are way beyond ordinary experience, but nonetheless real. So I'm not 100% sure, but I lean these days towards thinking that most of the descriptions are literal, but nonetheless, how to say, difficult to experience or rare to experience. Unsecure. Are you related to Robert from Monk Life Meditation? No relation to Robert or Monk Life. Are these mountains and waters? Yeah, Sweet and Sour, I think, has it. When you see a mountain, it's a mountain. When you see a mountain, it's not a mountain. When you see a mountain, it's a mountain again. That's right. Yeah, that's the right quote. Okay. Scarf. I want to begin meditating. Where do I begin? So, Scarf, if you look at the Sit and See series, that's where I'm teaching my meditation techniques. If you'd like to train a bit more seriously and support what I'm doing, because everything I do, like I said, I have available for free somewhere. In the 5 Foundations course, which is linked below this video, those people that are doing that course, I'm training a bit more seriously in meditation. So if you want to do it a bit more seriously and support what I'm doing on the channel, you could join the 5 Foundations formal course on School, and I can take you through the whole curriculum that I have put together for people that want to train in meditation while living in the real world. Okay, let's see. Chris Rudnicki. Please explain rebirth, not as an analogy. If there is no self, but the aggregates, what is reborn? So, Chris, if you go to the Discord server, which again is linked below the video, that's a very common question, and I have it in the common question section of the Discord server, answered in a fair amount of detail, and there's some discussion there from other members too that's quite helpful with some references and so forth. In brief, the Buddha says that you have a mental continuum, and associated with that mental continuum are imprints from previous actions. And your mental continuum, the mind is an entity that can give rise to new things, including physical things, because physical things and minds exist in a relationship, a mutual relationship. So the imprints from previous actions give rise to new physical experiences for the being who carries the imprints of those actions. And my wife is texting me saying, I will be murdered soon if I don't order food. Okay. So what is it that goes on from lifetime to lifetime? What goes on from lifetime to lifetime is the imprints from previous actions, which once they are used up by actually ripening as something, then that particular imprint goes away. But the continuum of consciousness, which is a causal entity, the previous moment causing the next moment, causing the next moment, and so forth, that's what carries on from lifetime to lifetime. And you could say, without too many problems, you could say that's what you are. That's who you are, is that continuum of mental events with no beginning. Not no beginning in a mysterious sense, in the sense that you are an infinite causal sequence into the past. Okay. So next, sorry, my friends, give me just a few seconds here. If you need to take a quick break to use the loo or what have you, you can. I'm going to quickly order food for my wifey so that she's not mad. Okay. Good. Right. What's next? Under one of your videos, in the comments, you said that many mystics, both in the East and West, had insight into emptiness. Could you elaborate on that? I can. Okay. Make sure this goes through. Lovely. Right. So I'm not sure that all of the mystical traditions arrive at the same point. I have doubts about that. Certainly, Buddhism makes a claim for itself that the insight it has is unique. However, that was true at the time of making those statements. Whether it's still true is an open question, in particular in lineages where Buddhism and something else have come together and now live under one roof. So, for example, sorry, my dog's getting angry at me now. So, for example, Buddhism and Taoism have shared a very, very long relationship in China. Taoism in China has a lot of different variants, but Taoism in China has cross-pollinated, let's say, repeatedly with Buddhism for historical reasons. On some occasions, for example, I think most recently the Qing dynasty, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. But during the Qing dynasty, the emperor didn't like Buddhism very much because it wasn't Chinese enough. And so during that time, a lot of people who were Buddhist changed their robes and became Taoists. And then at other periods of time, the emperor didn't like the Taoists very much, and a bunch of the Taoists moved into the Buddhist temples. And besides that, there was just a lot of cultural exchange, you know? People trained in different stuff in different places and didn't have a tremendously sectarian view about things. And so whatever was actually working, that's what they continued to do and carry on and pass on to each other. And therefore, what we have today as modern Taoism and modern Buddhism is by nature a blend of stuff. Having said that, there are certain streams of Taoist practice that I think probably arrive at the same place as Buddhism. There are certain streams of Hindu tantric practice, in particular, potentially Kashmiri Shivism, because of the close relationship between Kashmiri Buddhists and Kashmiri Hindus at a certain period in their history, that maybe some of them arrive at the same position as Buddhists at some point in their practice. There are... Who else? There are certain writings from Christian mystics and Sufi mystics that I've seen that sound like that person was getting very, very close to direct insight into emptiness with what they're writing. Do I know that's what they did for sure? No. Because there are experiences of non-duality and subtle types of consciousness that if you attain those, even for short periods, dramatically changes your perception of yourself. And the only words we really have to talk about this is me, myself, I. So even those experiences could cause you to write things in that way, just from relatively ordinary states of concentration. So I don't know for sure, but I suspect that certain streams of this stuff have overlapped historically, and therefore syncretic traditions have brought things together. Advaita Vedanta is another great example. Some of those streams seem to stop one step too early, according to my humble estimation. They're stopping one step too early in the process, and some of the other ones seem to carry on right through and go into actually explicitly into using things like Buddhist emptiness to complete their practice. So, yeah, it is what it is. The world is a bit messier than the textbook definitions of stuff based upon books that were written in the 2nd century. The world isn't like that now. It's become more syncretic. Okay. In the mountain question, the same as asking a theist how to tell one's own thoughts and God's thoughts. No. So, Tom, with the mountain question, the Buddha has a view that in modern thought we would call a massive error theory. What is a massive error theory? A massive error theory says that baked into all of your perceptions is a cognitive error of some kind, where you see things existing or think of things existing or know things, cognize things in such a way that you're not seeing them the way that they are. Not that things don't exist, but that certain aspects of the way you see things isn't reliable. And not just like, like a small number of things. The reason it's called a massive error theory is that we're saying that huge numbers of things, maybe even everything that appears to you, has at least one error baked into it in terms of how you understand it to exist. So this is the Buddha's idea, that when you look at the mountain, you see it existing in a way that is non-relational, is independent, often also unchanging, at least for short periods of time. You think, oh, well, it's the same mountain as it was a few minutes ago. Same mountain. When you're not thinking about it, same mountain. So we see it as unchanging, unitary. There's something in there that is the thing that is the mountain. There's one thing somehow that is the mountain, right? Independent, unitary. And that one thing that is the mountain doesn't really depend on all the parts, because I could get rid of any one of the parts of the mountain and still have the mountain, right? I could get rid of any one part of the mountain and still have the mountain. So it doesn't depend on any of the individual parts of the mountain. So we have this perceptual problem in which we think and see and know objects in a way that they don't actually exist. It is a massive error theory. So this isn't like saying you can't tell your thoughts from the thoughts of another being. This is saying every single perception you have has an error baked into it. And it's not that there's no cups, but it's the way that you understand the cup to exist based upon your misperception of the cup is mistaken. There is a cup, but it doesn't exist the way you think it does. So this would be more like you have a thought and you think your thought belongs to God, but it's your thought. Right? If you thought every one of your thoughts belonged to God, but it was actually your thoughts, then there is a massive error taking place in the way that you perceive all of your own thoughts, which would make you super delusional, right? Have you ever wondered why this term klesha means what it means? It means afflictive, or that you have an affliction, you have an illness, because you're made delusional by the fact that you don't understand the way this object exists. And you don't understand how you exist. You don't understand how the room you're sitting in exists. You don't understand how your spouse or children exist. You don't understand how anything exists. And because of it, you're relating to them in ways that is fantastical, based upon stuff that isn't real. As if you're hearing God's thoughts, but actually they were your thoughts all along. Right? So these aren't really comparable things, but if we had to stretch the analogy, we could say it sort of like that, I suppose. Okay. Okay, let's see. Forgive me if I chat too much. I was just about to go to sleep. I don't think I ever expected to hear some absolute high quality, coherent Dharma. Oh, well, I'm very glad. Very glad to help. I do this usually once a week, either Tuesdays or Thursdays now, and then if you have meditation questions only, then Monday, Wednesday, Friday is the meditation class. Yoga Lab. That's a practice for the moment of death to expel prana through the crown chakra. It's not just for that. No, that would be POA, which is related. But no. If you build up pressure in the basin just to move stuff to the head, that's not necessarily to expel your consciousness. It can be, but it's not necessarily for that. You don't have to do POA practice. That's something you could add on. Okay. Are the 16 steps of Anapanasati is that right, just breathing, right? Okay, sorry. So I haven't trained in that system, which is why I had to look it up. What I found quite often with solely breath-based systems is that how to say this, because I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing a lot of stuff, because I'm not criticizing the things in and of themselves. I'm criticizing really the context, right? A lot of practices I think are maybe impossible, if not impossible, extremely difficult to make work in real life when you're constantly stirring your mind up over and over and over again, which is why quite a few of the techniques that the Buddha taught, he told his monks and nuns and so forth, you need to leave and go into the forest. You need to get away from everything and go do these practices. And you need to do a lot of them for them to work, right? You need to do, if we are to believe the modern Theravadan, for example, then you need to be doing like 8 or 12 hours of practice a day to make these work. Okay. Well, if that's the case, then none of us have any shot of making this work at the high levels, right? like it's done. However, there are techniques that you can make work in real life, and I don't know. They're different than just sort of working with your mind focused on your breath, for example, which is basically using your mind to do the whole process. Just mind-based. I think is a really difficult approach, actually, despite its incredible popularity. It's so much easier if you use more than just your mind. If you bring your body into it, in particular, if you bring your energy system into it, but that's more complicated, makes it way easier, even though it's a bit more complex. Way easier. Because you're not depending just on your mind making everything transform. You're working on all of the aspects and bringing them along at the same time. Okay. So Danza, I have seen some Theravadan teachers talk a bit about prana and the elements and so forth. So I think there is something like this in the Pali, but it's, without being insulting, just descriptive. It's kind of anemic. It's thin in terms of description, and they don't use it much, or maybe they don't use it at all. I think the esoteric Theravada, I don't know for sure, but what is it called? Esoteric Theravada, which is not very big anymore. There's only a couple little pockets of it. They use it, but they don't. Again, the description of what it is and how you do it and all the elements is pretty thin relative to systems where it's fully developed. You know, there is a huge amount of information about these systems, how they work, techniques for dealing with the systems, different layers to them. And having worked with people that are quite competent in those areas, I can tell you that on the receiving end, there's nothing subtle about these things. They're just as tangible and real as anything else you might you might interact with. Yeah, I don't know what more to say about it than that at this stage of the game, but like I said, I find them extremely helpful, extremely helpful to work with more than one layer of yourself in this process, in particular as a layperson, because if you were sitting 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day, you could work on basically any technique in a good lineage of Buddhism. And if you have that kind of determination and time and you're doing retreat and whatever, do whatever technique people are telling you to do in retreat, mantra practice, breath practice, basically you name it. And as long as your body doesn't break down, it's going to produce some results because you're just doing a ton of it. You're doing a ton of it. If you have a good teacher and they're taking you along, it's going to make stuff happen. In real life, since you don't have 3 days, for example, to let your mind settle down and the whole system settle down, every time you sit down to do 10 minutes of meditation, you don't have 3 days to wait for your mind and body to be calm. Wouldn't it be better if you had a system that made the mind or made the body and the energy system calm before you even sat down to do your 10 minutes of meditation? Wouldn't that be, if your body and mind felt the way that it did after 3 days of retreat all the time, that's just how your system was, wouldn't that be better? You see what I mean? So this is what some of these other systems have developed, is ways of working with the body and the energy system, and to Yoga Lab's point, the breath also, to make the whole system better as a baseline, so that the work you do with your mind is much more effective, much more powerful. Okay. Yoga Lab says, when you say Buddhists only use the mind, does this contrast with yogis who use the breath, ethical foundation, etc.? No, what I mean is that when you're training as a Buddhist, you would have ethics in the sutra system. Basically, you would have ethics, concentration, and wisdom. These are the three main elements, right? And then you would have refuge, renunciation, and as a Mahayana practitioner, bodhicitta. So these are the main elements of your practice: ethics, concentration, wisdom, and refuge, renunciation, bodhicitta. Okay? So you would have these aspects combining in various ways with other things added on to them to make up your practice. But when it came to training and concentration, you wouldn't be using, for example, not very often would you be using something like breath retention techniques, or techniques having to do with controlling the breathing in a certain way, in terms of lengthening the breaths, or techniques having to do with certainly not resting the mind in certain points inside the body to trigger things to happen psychophysically in the psychophysical system to create certain states of mind. You wouldn't use that, as far as I understand, except for in some small pockets of practice. You wouldn't really use that at all. So this idea that you can use the body, the energy system, the breath in sophisticated ways, etc., to create the mental states that are beneficial for practice is basically coming from the yogis, and the Jains, the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Taoists. Roughly speaking, they share these things in common. And there's actually been some argument that there's a two-way conversation that was happening for centuries between China and India. Centuries. China, India, and parts of the Middle East, where information was going, and yogis and practitioners were going back and forth along the Silk Road and what have you, and spreading these ideas and teachings back and forth for centuries, sharing, okay, what's actually working, what's not working. So, this process is still ongoing. I mean, I actually find it quite exciting as an academic that that I think we're right on the brink. Maybe towards the end of my lifetime, in this lifetime, I think we'll start seeing some recognition of this stuff. I don't think in the next 10 or 20 years, but there's just all of these extra layers that makes up what a human being is that we haven't done much study with yet. But yogis in particular, and people that do qigong and neigong, are becoming more and more open about the weirder looking and weirder sounding stuff that they can do because of these practices. They're becoming increasingly open, more open, more open, more open. And eventually that will get the interest of probably younger scientists and younger academics. The older ones think this stuff is too weird. But as the academy continues to change and attitudes continue to shift, I think we'll see more studies done of this stuff, and it will become more and more open, more acceptable. And maybe within my lifetime, within the next 30, 40 years, we'll have some really interesting data on this kind of stuff. And I'm actually hoping that as the Taoists and the Tantrics and of various flavors, they get together and they have more of these conversations with each other about these practices, it will improve this technology of how to work with ourselves and improve our concept of what's possible to do with this human unit. I'm really excited by this. I mean, I basically, because I'm a academic-y kind of guy, I've done a lot of practice, of course, but, I'm trained as a Western academic, so I have all of the skeptical tools of Western academia at my disposal. And if there's charlatanry to be found, I'll probably sniff it out because I've been trained to sniff it out, right? Despite that, I have seen and experienced with my teachers and in my communities, different communities, Buddhist and Taoist communities, seen and experienced things that are beyond our current understanding of how things work in terms of physics and in terms of what the body is and how it works and subtle substances inside the body. And because of those experiences, I now train in those things quite seriously. And the things that these systems describe are possible actually do happen if you do the practices. So, as an academic, that's good enough for me, Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Got to go quickly because dinner is on the way. Deconstruction Zone, ex-evangelical, destroys all fundamentalist Christian arguments. Oh, like a call-in show. Yeah. I mean, I would do something if it was like just a conversation. I don't know. I'm not super huge on, I know it's really popular and I could probably get more followers and stuff if I did debates and all this stuff, but my mind is so slow, like I would be the person in a debate who someone would make a good point and I would just sit there for 2 or 3 minutes like, yeah, that's probably right. And then that becomes the clip that defines your career for the next 50 years, as an internet personality. Because my mind is like, I tend to like to think things through, spend a lot of time digesting it, read some stuff, do some practice, think about it, ask a few people. And then I'm like, okay, yeah, this is a really stable position now. So I'm not like generally, I mean, despite doing open Q&A things, I'm not like an on-the-fly debate kind of guy. You have to have certain skills to do that, and I've never, haven't trained very much in those skills. The Nobleman. Do you think if you haven't attained the state of stream entry, having just attained the first concentration, that your ability to enter and exit that at will creates a strong mental imprint? Yeah, of course. And the other thing is if you combine that with refuge, so you think, okay, I want to continue training in all this stuff in my next life, and I have built up this amount of ability, according to the Theravada systems, if you just have really good concentration, basically, you can navigate the intermediate state really well because you're not going to be pulled left and right so much by various things because your mind is much more stable. You've trained your mind to be very, very stable. So getting through the intermediate condition to your next rebirth is not so tumultuous. Okay, Data asks, is emptiness always a prerequisite to fullness? Can fullness be found first? So this is a bit of a word game. You've got to be careful with this way of thinking, okay? So emptiness refers specifically to the fact that a thing that exists as a set of relationships doesn't exist independent of those relationships. To say it one more time, emptiness means that this thing that exists as a bunch of relationships doesn't exist or is empty of existing as something that exists independent of all those relationships. So emptiness, you could also say, is absent, right? What is absent is a cup that exists non-relationally, a cup that exists utterly independent of relationships, right? That's something that doesn't exist. So when you look inside the cup, you find that the cup is empty or lacks or is absent this thing that exists utterly independent of all these relationships I spent the first hour talking about. Okay, I've got to run through the last few questions quickly because dinner is a minute away, my friends. Melinda shows cross-pollination of Greek and Eastern thought. Yeah. Can you use this power to enter the Brahma world? Yeah, I mean, that's what the suttas say. If you have lots of concentration, you can enter the higher realms using that concentration. But then you burn up the good karma unless you have really good refuge, and then you can continue your training in the upper realms. Yeah, so, I mean, if you wanted to attain the upper realms, you can, but training in the upper realms is slower than training in the human realm, generally speaking. Where do thoughts come from? They come from your mind, from your consciousness. Are karma and karmic cycles the different world you can reincarnate into, etc., empty? Yes, everything, as we were just describing, is empty, right? Empty of what? Empty of non-relational existence. Because it exists dependently and relationally and in a complex of relationships of causes and parts and subject and object, when you look for something, including karma, that exists independent of causes and parts and subject and object, there is no such thing. So, of course, everything that exists in a relational way, not a non-relational way. So, nothing unchanging things still exist as a relationship between subject and object, not independently. Things that exist as an eternal causal chain exist depending upon parts and causes and subject and object, not independently or non-relationally. So even unchanging eternal things exist within the realm of dependent origination. Okay, 2 questions, then I've got to run, my friends. Arshi. I can't pronounce it, terribly sorry. What does a person experience during enlightenment? If you read the Pali Suttas, the Buddha said first he recalled all of his past lives, and they were infinite. Then he recalled the details of them, and he recalled infinite periods, infinite reoccurrences of the universe exploding into existence and contracting and going out of existence over and over and over again without beginning. He then experienced the karma of sentient beings. His mind reached out and saw all sentient beings because of their past actions going up in terms of rebirth and reincarnation, or rebirth or reincarnation, and then going down again, and the different statuses they attained depending upon their previous imprints from their previous actions. And then he experienced the release of his ignorance, which destroys the 12 links of interdependence. So he achieved nirvana. So he had a direct experience of nirvana. So all of his past lives, the infinite past lives, and the relationship of karma, the actions beings perform, and the imprints that forms on those beings' consciousnesses, and then his own nirvana, his own release. That's what he said he experienced. There's a bit more in the Mahayana description, but those are the big 3. What is the best evidence for what the historical Buddha actually taught? I don't trust all the religious jibber-jabber that's accumulated. Okay. So one thing that's really important to realize is that the Buddha said we can all attain the same realization that the Buddha attained. If you believed that, then you shouldn't throw away stuff that came later simply because it's later. That's one thing. Another thing is, if you don't believe that and you're trying to get to the earliest version has all the jibber jabber in it. It has deities, it has rebirth, it has karma, it has multiple realms of rebirth, it has karma leading to really specific kinds of results across different rebirths. It has Buddhas and bodhisattvas existing in heavenly realms, and countless lifetimes and universes coming into and going out of existence. It has all of that, and it has all the vows for monks and nuns. The Buddha encouraged his followers to make monasteries and to put on robes and to shave their heads, etc., etc., etc. So all of the jibber jabber that you don't like, including all the miracles and everything else, are right there in the very best, earliest historical sources that we have. As a matter of fact, all of that continues right up to the modern day with modern practitioners. So even modern practitioners still claim to have all of those experiences, to attain all of the same attainments, etc., 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 right up to modern day. So I would say this is not a, if you don't like all of that, what did the Buddha say for people that don't like all that? He just said, look, if you assume all that's not true, but do what I said anyway, because it logically makes sense, even in this world, to do what I'm telling you to do, which is train your mind so that you have more good qualities and less bad qualities, to put it simply. If you do that, your life will turn out better for you than the other way, won't it? Roughly speaking, as best you can from your side, it'll turn out better than it would have turned out. So even if you don't believe all this other stuff, it still makes sense to train in what I'm telling you to train in. This is what the Buddha said. And then if it turns out that I was right, then your next rebirth will be even better because you did all of this. Okay, that little ping was my wife telling me dinner has arrived. So just on time, we've reached the bottom of the chat. Please do, my friends, since this is a donation by donation effort, I do this full-time, teaching meditation, doing these Q&As, making content. Please do click one of the links below. If you got anything useful out of this, chip in whatever you can. This is all I do. So if no donations come in, or no people join the courses, or etc., then I can't keep doing it. So if you guys are getting something out of this, you think it's valuable, please do chip in whatever amount you can through Venmo, through PayPal, if you need to, through GoFundMe. But on GoFundMe, slide the slider all the way down so that they're not taking like 15%, they're taking like 2%, right? And then I can do this for another month with everybody, and everything carries on. If you want to train a bit more seriously, jump into the 5 Foundations course, which is down below. All that material is available for free on YouTube, but I have organized it much more nicely on the 5 Foundations course. If you want to do the physical and energetic aspect, I've partnered with Neil Ripsky because he actually knows all that stuff. I train in it. He knows, been doing it for 40 years. You could also jump into the Lohan course. I get a piece of that course as well, and I'm going to do retreats with Neil in the near future. We're going to be doing retreats for Lohan and 5 Foundations as one combined retreat, probably starting next March 2027. So please do chip in what you can. It's been a pleasure. Really, really glad to be here with you and to help out and do this. I really am having the time of my life and don't want to be doing anything else. So if all of you think this is valuable and like me to carry on doing it as time goes on, donate whatever you can today or in the future. Whatever you can, chip it in, and then we can carry on doing this together until I'm an old man. All right? Okay. Talk to you all later. Hope to see you again very soon. Try not to disappear before I do. Cheers.